Thank you, John, for coming back to Nepal after 16 years. You were
Yeah.
here in 2009 and now 2025. How are you feeling?
Well, it's a great pleasure to be back, and I'm really enjoying it. It's amazing to see how the country has changed so much in 16 years, and but also that the mountains are still there, and the snow and ice are still up there, which is good to see.
In 2009, when you were here, you went to Mustang,
Mm.
and that time we also started Nepal National Water and Weather Week. And
Yes.
that time you were key speaker during one of the biggest function that we ever had during the week.
Mm.
So it's glad that you also started 2025, and this year we have a Nepal National Glacier Water and Weather Week. So we have added a glacier, considering its importance. And you started with your talk, giving on International Year of Glacier Preservation and associated with UN Decade of Action for Cryospheric Sciences.
Mhm.
So, how ice and snow are important to our life, to our society, our economy?
Well, Nepal, like many other countries around the world, is highly dependent upon the melt of snow and also glacier ice for its water resources, and also how this controls the climate in the area. And there's about 2 billion people on the planet that are dependent upon what we call the cryosphere. That's the snow and ice for their water. And many of these people live very, very far from where the snow and ice are. They can live well down long rivers in tropical areas or deserts or semi-arid areas. But in Nepal, you're close to the mountains, and so Nepalese understand that the mountains are the source of this water and are crucially important for the really for life in Nepal in every way. So it's uh, it's always a pleasure to come here and see that and see this understanding of this. But it's also a concern because the planet is warming up. The greenhouse gases have continued to increase at a very high rate, and there's really not much slowing down of this given recent events around the world, and this has caused the temperature to rise consistently. And so, over the last year, we've had the hottest year ever measured by
Mm-hmm.
humanity, and possibly the hottest year ever occurring on the Earth's surface since in 120,000 years. And we are now more than 1.5 degrees above the pre-industrial limit and we promised we would keep things less than 1.5 degrees. I was saying 1.5 degrees is already too warm for
Mm-hmm.
glaciers and for snowpacks, and now we're at 1.55. So we're heading in the wrong direction. So this is time to take great notice of the role of snow and ice in the Earth's system and how it regulates its weather, how it regulates its water, how it regulates ocean resources, and then really controls life in so many forms around the planet. I'm not sure that we can even survive
Mm-hmm.
as a species and civilization without snow and ice. If we were to lose it all, the effects would be devastating.
Yeah, thanks for highlighting the importance of snow and ice. So on 21st January, we had a curtain raiser, or there were main events and side events to initiate International Year of Glacier Preservation.
Mm-hmm.
And since this year we will have a World Day of Glaciers on 21st of March, and this year it will be the first of that kind of celebration. So we have a Glacier Day, and then we have International Year of Glacier Preservation. Then why do we still need a UN decade of action on cryospheric sciences?
Well, with the International Year for Glaciers Preservation, our hope is to raise awareness of the role of ice, glaciers, and snow and frozen ground in the world's climate and hydrological and ecological systems and their importance for society. And we hope to continue to progress the science and get better plans, but 1 year is awfully short. And so you can assess where you're at,
Mm-hmm.
you can emphasize the importance of making changes we can put out the key message that the only way to preserve glaciers is to reduce the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And that means humans have to stop polluting less. And we have to do it right away. It's urgent. This is a crisis, a disaster we're facing right now. So things like that we can do in a year. But we need to do more because the climate will continue to warm no matter what we do for some time. We can reduce it with in the future, but it's still going to warm to some degree. And we already have substantial loss of snow and glaciers in mountain systems around the world. And so we have to work on how we're going to adapt to those changes in the short term before we get it under control, because it will take decades to get this under control. And I'm optimistic that we can, but we have to have this adaptation in place in the meantime. And the decade of cryospheric science allows us to advance the sciences of snow and ice, and relating to the ocean systems, to the rivers, to the atmosphere, to the ecology of these systems, so we can better help humans plan, adapt, and adjust for this. And that will take a substantial effort and will take a full 10 years, I'm sure.
As a scientist and as a professor in the University of Saskatchewan, and earlier with different capacities, you have initiated several global and international networks like INART, and before that even ISXIS, International Commission for Snow and Ice thing, ice hydrology. So there were several such programs, like other was Global Water Future. So how optimistic are you with IYGP, and you indicate, considering your past experiences, maybe you can start with sharing some of your previous experiences, so that what are they and how you initiated or you got engaged, and now with these new initiatives.
Yeah, so the new initiatives are really a culmination of efforts to bring scientists together on questions of importance for society and to effect change by working together. What I found as a scientist early on in my career is I could make scientific discoveries, but it required collaborations to make big discoveries, and then also to have impact on our decision makers and our society to start to change things. That often took working with even greater numbers of people and making sure that we communicated these results and spoke to decision makers on a regular basis. So it's hard to do that as an individual scientist. It's better to have a club and a group of like-minded individuals who are working together. And so we've been very lucky in Canada and around the world with various initiatives that have promoted things such as high alpine weather stations and hydrological stations, or the better predictions of changes from snowmelt and ice melt in cold regions, or looking at how cold regions are changing. And then finally, how can we sustain and develop our water resources in such a way that we account for global changes, but still preserve the environment and preserve humanity's ability to have prosperity in the future. So many previous networks were around this, but they tended to be a small group of nations or national in Canada, whereas the International Year for Glacier Preservation is a UN initiative, so it's the whole globe is involved, and the same with the executive action for the cryospheric sciences. So this is a big leap up in terms of what we can do, but it's also a massive leap in complexity. How do you get the whole world to do anything together, especially now? Maybe ever. Maybe it's always been hard. But these are incredible challenges that we have, and but we're working hard on. And I've been so impressed with the people contributing to the International Year for Glaciers Preservation from UNESCO and from the World Meteorological Organization, but also from universities and civil society and NGOs and others around the world, schools and others. It's been amazing. And then the involvement of artists and musicians and cultural people, climbers into this initiative. And this gives me hope that we are going to change things a bit. We are going to change really the whole perspective of humanity on the globe, that at the end of the year, we'll better understand that our life support system is the snow and ice, that snow is our white gold, that glaciers are our bank account, with our water, and that we need to preserve these to really preserve our ecosystems, our humanity, our civilization in its basic form. And that by getting climate change under control so that we can preserve our glaciers will also mean that we can save so many other things, from heat waves that kill people to wildfires to rising sea levels from ocean expansion to severe floods to severe droughts. All these things are occurring because of warming climate. And so if we can save the glaciers, we can save ourselves. And that's the right thing to be doing.
Like you said, it's a global initiative, and you appreciated that how all networks or global countries, putting their efforts together to make it successful. So countries like Nepal, what they can do or what could be the role?
Well, Nepal has a very important role. You're the stewards of the Himalayas. And so Nepal decides what happens in the Himalayas. There's so many things. For instance, soot on the glaciers accelerates their melt rate. Well, where does that soot come from? It comes from burning. It can be biomass burning in rural areas. It can be pollution from cars and motorbikes and buses in urban areas. And these are things we can control. We can start to reduce that and then slow the rate of glacier melt. But also, all that soot, that carbon going into the atmosphere, contributes to the greenhouse effect and creates greater global heating. So by reducing those emissions, then we can also reduce the overall heating of the atmosphere. And I know it's hard for a less well-off country or poorer country to do these things, but Nepal also is a place where on a clear day in Kathmandu you can see the Himalayas, and there's not many clear days anymore. So we just had one, and I'm hoping that inspires people to say, I want more of those, and I want my children to be able to see those. And when those days are clear and you can see the Himalayas, you want to see them covered with snow and ice, not bare rock, not providing any stream flow. So that's the other part.
Yeah, we together, because you mentioned about carbon soot and black carbon thing. We both observed defense of one of our students from Institute of Engineering, Prasanna Dhakal, who did his master thesis on impact of black carbon in one of the glaciers in Langtang region. So how important are those research, and how we can expand similar kind of research in the future, and especially including those graduate students or early career researchers?
Yes. Well, Prasanna Dhakal showed that a Nepalese student can learn the mathematical and computer and physical techniques in order to calculate how severe the impact of black carbon is on accelerating glacier melt, and then to document and to prove this very rigorously going forward. This is important information for policymakers. So decision makers in Kathmandu for Nepal need to know the results of his thesis. So they realize then that, wow, it's not just global heating, which is coming from industrial countries like USA and England and Russia, Canada, but it's also local pollution produced right here in Nepal that's accelerating the glacier melt. And so you can't always control what the other big countries are going to do, but you can control what happens here. You can take action, and you can make this turn around. And it's quite a lot of melt. The addition of black carbon would have meant that some of the snow would be turning into ice in the future, and but with the black carbon, it's not turning into ice. It's not even creating the transition to ice called firn. So these are terrifying results, really. And but it also means that the solutions are partly here.
Yeah, when you mentioned about snow converting into the ice, so one of again another new student, Susa Manandar, is doing her research, her master research, especially on impact of warming on the change of precipitation phase, especially from snow to rain in high mountains, and how you see such kind of collaboration, especially in between the University of Saskatchewan and the University in Nepal, Tribhuvan University, and such kind of research can contribute understanding the science.
Yeah, so really for both theses, there's tremendous interest in this. I'll just go back to the black carbon for a bit, but in Canada we've had massive wildfires because of hot, dry summers. These have burnt vast areas of Canadian forests, and it's put soot on our glaciers, which have accelerated the melt rates about 10%. But also, we've noticed more rainfall and less snowfall over time. And the rainfall, when it comes, is more intense. The rainstorms last longer, but the intensity, the severity of the rainstorms is longer. And this is a big concern. Also, sometimes we get more rain on snow. So rain's falling on wet snow and it causes a rapid snowmelt, and that can cause flooding sometimes. It can even trigger glacial lake outburst floods in some cases. So that increase in rainfall is a big concern in Canada, but it's a big concern in Nepal as well. And of course, if it's raining on the snowpack, raining on the glacier, they're going to melt. If it's snowing on them, then they're being refreshed. And the big transition occurs in the spring and in the fall, but also depends on the elevation. So Nepal is getting rainfall at higher and higher elevations, as is Canada. So better understanding this again will be very important for policymakers, so they understand the increased risk of extreme hydrological events, floods really, that are associated with this, but also that a simple thing of falling precipitation shifting from snowfall to rainfall can mean the end of a glacier. It can mean a glacier will no longer exist in a few decades, and it will mean the snow line is much higher in the mountains. And so the spring melt, which is so important for replenishing groundwater and farmers' water supply and community water supply, won't be there unless it rains. And rainfall is less reliable than snowfall. Snowfall builds up over the winter. It's quite reliable that way. Rainfall comes when it comes. And if you have a drought, then it doesn't come. And so it's very dangerous to be relying just on rainfall, even in the mountains.
Yeah, you rightly pointed out, because in the case of mountains in Nepal, especially during winter crops, they are failing because of less snow and more rain. And in the past, there used to be snow a couple of feet, but nowadays only 1 feet or even less, and that doesn't also stay longer. It melts
Yeah.
out very fast, so that is impacting winter crops and other activities in the mountains due to the less moisture for the soil. Uh, that is there, but this is the research part. But in Nepal, when we talk about making the policymakers aware or the community aware, we have celebrated. We started in 2009 celebrating World Water Day on 22nd March and World Meteorological Day 23rd March together jointly as a World Water National Water and Weather Week. But now we are going to celebrate from this year Glacier Water and Weather Week. You have participated in 2009 and
Yeah,
now
yeah.
2025. So what additional activities or something different we should be doing?
Well, first, that progression itself is fantastic, and it's a big progression because the politicians do pay attention to this. Back in 2009, I was able to meet with the Minister of Water and talk to him about the policy changes Nepal needed as it was beginning to design a constitution and look at how to apportion water. The adding glaciers to that keeps it in the minds of the politicians that we are losing these glaciers, that we are on a trajectory for their destruction. And along with the destruction of the glaciers is the loss of our snowpack, the loss of reliability of our stream flow and water supply, and shifts in our climate that make life on Earth uninhabitable for many people. Many parts of southern India and even northern India during the heat waves are going to be impossible for humans to stay alive outside. And it's already starting to happen. It will happen more and more frequently. How do you find new homes for 500 million people from India? Where will they go? These are questions I can't answer as a scientist, but these are the things that politicians should be worried about now. And so these are things that we have to make sure are being brought forward in the events such as the Glacier Water and Weather Week.
Yeah, how important of engaging any such programs or even in the research that we were discussing to include local communities or some indigenous communities as well. And
Yes.
I'm sure you may want to also elaborate a little bit more on the UNESCO chair
Yeah,
on
yeah.
mountain water sustainability, which have Nepal also a part.
Yes, yes. So this UNESCO chair in mountain water sustainability is something that Canada and Nepal share. We both have chair holders in our countries, along with Chile, and it's the chair is taking a different approach to this. It's not just science, and the science in it is good. It's very, very important, but it's also saying how can we take the scientific information and then also then approach the communities to find out their knowledge and their solutions, and then work together to come up with solutions that are appropriate for those communities. Because the people on the front lines are those in often remote communities, sometimes they're indigenous, and they have to solve these problems, and they're usually far away from central governments. So they have to find a lot of solutions themselves. So if scientists can work with these communities and say, hey, this is what we think is coming, and but not say, here's the solution, I'm a scientist and here's your solution. This never works. You go through and say, this is what we know, this is what we don't know. The community people talk and say, this is what we've seen, this is what we're exploring, and then work together to find a way to for the community to become more sustainable. These remote communities are not the cause of global warming, but they might be able to reduce biomass a little bit, but they can certainly manage their water very, very differently. And there's some clever ideas for storing groundwater or storing water in ice that are good for local communities to get through dry periods.
Yeah, last week you interacted with many senior scientists as well as you visited Tribhuvan University, Institute of Engineering as well as Institute of Science and Technology, and also interacted with the students, undergraduate and graduate students at the Small North Nepal, who is also doing a lot of researches in high mountains and related to the water and community and climate change related field. So, do you have any, what are your observations or and any suggestions that how should they move ahead with their research activities?
Yeah, I was very encouraged by what I saw at Small Earth Nepal, in that all of those projects involve working with the community in some way. So they would have a scientific element or something like that, but it's never the science alone. It was a science in society, it's science for society, but it's also science with society. And that is very different from how many top-down scientific organizations tend to work. And earlier at ECMOD, very similar there. They work with people and they work with communities and they try to demonstrate new ways forward. And in many countries, not just Nepal, but in Pakistan and China and India and Bhutan and Afghanistan. So this is fundamentally important, and I think both organizations are way ahead of many groups in North America or Europe, where it's still very much, okay, here's the science, and here's the science for the policymakers, and here's the solution, and we try to tell the community what to do. We're trying to turn that around in Canada and listen to Indigenous people more and to remote communities more, and also look at things like gender issues. How does this, all these issues of climate and water affect males and females very, very different, men and women very, very differently. And but it also affects people with different economic backgrounds very differently. The rich and the poor are much more vulnerable to these things. And there are other sectors, farmers, of course, affected differently from people in cities, and then sectors such as hydroelectricity and mining and others are all affected very, very differently. So it's important to engage with all of them, and to find out what their questions are, what are their concerns, and then keep them up to date about how the science is advancing, and then work together to find the solutions. And that's something we explored a lot in Global Water Futures in Canada, but I think it's already very much the way of doing business in Nepal, which is good. It puts you at the leading edge of how things should be done around the world.
So you are returning back to Canada tomorrow, and
Yes.
after being here for a week, what are your future plans that you can think of, and is there any messages that you want to give to the young researchers that you met recently?
Well, I'm going back to Canada to carry on with scientific research, and I think I'm even more motivated now to do this than before when you talk to people and see the problems and issues that they're serving. I think for young people who want to get involved, one is get involved in science. There's not enough young people getting involved in science. It's not always an easy life, but it's a very interesting life and very exciting life, and you can do a lot of good with science. But even for those who don't, listen to the scientists. This is what Greta Thunberg said. Listen to the scientists, but also listen to the communities, and try to bring this information together. And there's many people who can be the bridge between these two, and that's a tremendous thing. And then also, Nepal is a small country, so it's possible to influence the government here. You're not in a giant mega state, so I think do some things to make your politicians listen to some of the messages that are important to you, and work to convince them that they need to take these into account in their decision making. And then, the other thing finally is for some people, some of the most important politicians in the world have been those who understood the science very strongly when they got into politics, and they were able to advance things in a very powerful way with that background information. So these are always things to keep in mind.
Yeah. I still want to go back to the research and monitoring, especially in the high mountains or Himalayas. Whenever we talk about snow and ice observations or climate monitoring in high mountains, we quote that there is a data gap, there is a lack of observations, ground observations, and in situ stations. So how they could be minimized, or how can we intensify such kind of a research and monitoring? Particularly, there are some other options that you can share with us.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to set up weather stations at high elevations and water stations, snow and ice stations, but it's crucially important, and the benefits of doing so far outweigh the costs because they lead to better predictions and forecasts of floods and droughts. They lead to better understanding of the changes in the mountain cryosphere over time with climate change, and they can help inform solutions to these problems. So they seem hard to put up, but the benefits they provide are worth it. We don't have much information on the high mountains, and this is not just Nepal. This is probably every country around the world that has high mountains. We have insufficient monitoring there. And it's kind of crazy, given how much we depend on the water that comes out of the mountains, that we don't really understand them far better than we do right now. So we need to advance the understanding, but we have to base that advancing on the observations. And even tools like artificial intelligence, they work on big data. In the mountains, we don't have big data, we have small data. So artificial intelligence isn't going to work. We have to rely on understanding, upon physics, upon our ecosystem understanding to build that up, and even our small data can help us advance with that. So and that's another thing, because governments often don't want to pay for this, but we need to convince them that it's worthwhile, that despite all the other stress they have and great important things that they're trying to do, that they should do this little small thing, more monitoring, more observations, and they can use that then to design resilient and sustainable solutions for the water problems going forward.
Thanks, John. Once again, thank you for visiting Nepal and spending your time with young researchers, especially very enthusiastic and hardworking graduate and undergraduate students of Nepal. So hope to have you again in the future and continue the collaboration.
Well, thank you. It's been a great honor to be visiting you and to see your great success as a scientist as you build your programs here and have tremendous influence in Nepal. But it's also been so wonderful to meet the young researchers and scientists and others around doing the hard work and doing it cheerfully. And that's a wonderful thing to see. That gives me hope for the future.
Thank you. Thank you, John.